Hi friends, welcome or welcome back. This is Laura with Laura B. FlossTube. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to continue our series on sewing the ornament holder Christmas tree quilt. In this video, my goal is to explain how I'm going to divide and conquer that background that our tree is going to be appliqued onto. So I've done a few things to help us with that. I'm going to show you how to grid out your graphic and then divide it out to make it easier to applique the pieces together. And then also how to label those background fabrics in case you have several different patterns that you're working with to make sure you have an even disbursement. And then finally, we're just going to start looking at how to assemble those pieces and get them ready for the applique pieces. The first step in preparing our background for our applique shapes is making sure that we know how to disperse those fabrics and which pieces we can assemble and which ones we need to leave alone, and how to get a really good layout for our applique. So let me show you what I've done to grid out my graphic to know which pieces need to be sewn together. All right, so you may recall when in the beginning I printed out this graphic. This is the graphic of the tree that I'm appliquing onto my background squares. And my background squares are 10.5 inches. So all of these squares in this grid are based on a 10-inch grid. So what I did is I went through and I looked at my graphic and I decided, okay, well, if I split it here or here or here, then it's going to be easiest for me to get those rows together and build that tree onto the background of my quilt. So up here at the top, you'll see that I had a star and a circle. I'm like, well, those are pretty easy and they don't have to be necessarily exact. So I am going to go ahead and sew these first two background squares together. And then when I have my applique shapes, I will be able to applique those right onto where I need them to be in my background. Now, I'm not going to worry about it being an exact location. It just needs to be close in the general idea. All of these background shapes, all the stars and circles around on the outside of the tree, none of those are going to really matter if it's exact placement. Now, exact placement is going to matter once we start building this tree in the middle. And we'll go over how to make sure those shapes are onto the background pieces really well for those when I go over the applique part. But today we're only going to focus on assembling our background squares in order to prepare them for the applique process. So hopefully you can see these red lines on here, and this is how I have divided my tree up. So you can see I have two squares here and one here by itself and two more here. And this next row, I kind of went by rows until I got down here where I was like, well, this part of the tree, I can just go ahead and sew these four squares together and these four squares together and these two together. So when I sew these together, the other thing I'm going to do to make sure I keep track of what goes where is I will label those. So when I sew these two squares together, I'll put a little post-it and a straight pin that says row 1, block 1 and 2. So when I look at this is going to be row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, block 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I know this is block 1, 1, this is block 1, 2. Just like working kind of like with an Excel spreadsheet, except I'm only using numbers and there's no letters. But you could use letters if that would help you out as well. Okay, so the other thing I did for background fabric, just to make sure I have an even disbursement, because I'm using 3 different fabrics in my background, I've labeled them on my sheet what is what. So I have reindeers, I have polka dots, and I have fireworks. So on each one of these squares, I went through and said, put an R, a P, or an F for reindeer, polka dot, or firework. So now I know when I look at these exactly what I need. So I know I need a reindeer and a polka dot for these two, a firework for that one, a reindeer and a polka dot for those, and all of them are labeled all the way down through. Same thing with my border. I have all of that RPF on all of those rectangles around on the outer border, just so I can keep it straight in my mind and keep my fabrics where I want them. So let's grab our fabric, head over to the sewing machine, and I will show you how I'm going to start sewing these together and how to start labeling these for my organization before I start appliquing. Here we are at the sewing machine. What I'm going to start doing is assembling my rows for my background that I'm going to applique that tree onto. As you recall, my squares are all 10.5 inches. I did that because my fabric was 42 inches wide, so it makes it a really nice even cut across the fabric. So my first row, first block is the reindeer fabric. Now this fabric is directional, so I got to make sure that my little reindeers are always facing up on this one. And then the next fabric that I have is polka dot. Now I'm going to go ahead and put an image up here of kind of the pattern that I'm following. And if you notice, which you have to look really close, but on the background squares, I have an R, a P, or an F written on each one of those squares that tell me if it's reindeer, polka dot, or firework. So I know the first section I need for row 1, block 1 and 2 is reindeer and polka dot. So I'm going to go ahead and sew those together. I am decreasing my stitch length as well, just to 2.0. Just using a 1/4 inch seam, sew those 2 pieces of fabric together. And now the last thing I'm going to do, just so I can keep organized and keep going ahead and building all of my background fabric, I have all these little labels written out. So this, I know this is row 1, block 1 and 2. I'm going to pin that to the top left side of my reindeer block because that is block 1. And I will go ahead and press all of these before I actually start appliquing onto them. But for right now, I'm just going to set this to the side, upside down, because I'm going to build on top of it with my other blocks. And I did fold it. Now, the next one that I have in my pattern is just a single square. So I have a single firework. Hang on, the fabric's way over here. So this is row 1, block 3. I'll pin that on there and put it upside down on my design board. Now the next 2 I have is again another reindeer and a polka dot. And then these 2 squares are going to complete row 1 for me. As soon as I get these sewn together, I will pin that on there and then start working on row 2. Again, I'm going to pin my little label that is row 1, block 4 and 5 to the top left of my little reindeer, which is the block 4 in the first row. Fold those together and put those onto my design board. Now, I already have the first row together. So when I go to applique my shapes, I know here's row 1, here's all the blocks I need for it. And that way when I start to assemble them into a full row, I still keep that order of background fabrics that I wanted to maintain in my original plan. So row 2, block 1 is a single block, and that is a firework. So I'll just go ahead, take this firework fabric, and pin to it. And then I have 3 blocks for this second row. So I have a reindeer, a polka dot, and a firework. And I'm just going to take my time with these. You know, normally if you watch my videos, you know that I am an avid chain piecer. But you know what? For this project, I'm going to take this one row at a time, one block at a time. And I'm doing that because I want to make sure that I don't lose my pattern along the way. Now, once again, I have my label made, which is row 2, block 2 through 4, and I'm going to pin that in the top left-hand corner of the first block of that segment. And then the last one in that row is a reindeer. And it's a single block. All right, so here are 2 rows. Now, you might be asking, why are you putting it upside down? Well, because I'm building upon it all the way down the quilt. And then when I'm done at the end, I can flip it over and row 1, block 1 is on top again. And it goes right on down the rows for the quilt. So I'm going to continue working on this, building out my rows. And then we'll do a quick wrap up at the end just to tell you my next steps. I was working down my pattern and realized that rows 6 and 7 are done a little differently. So let me show you how I'm going to build those out to make it easier on myself to put things together on my design board for appliquing later. All right, so if you look at row 6 up here in the pattern, row 6, block 1 and 2 is a polka dot and a firework. So let me grab those. So I have my polka dot and my firework, and I put whatever is on the right side on top. So when I open these up, I have polka dot and then firework. Now, instead of going to block 3 and 4 in row 6, I'm going to go to block 1 and 2 in row 7. And I can do that because my pattern is laid out so well for me that I know exactly what goes where. So row 7, block 1 is a reindeer, and then block 2 is a polka dot. And again, I'll put my polka dot on top because it's the one that is second in the row. Now, when I cut these loose from the machine, I have my row 6 and my row 7. And this is just like when you're making like a little 4-patch or something. If you're going to do some chain piecing or some webbing, as some other people say. When I open these up, they're in the right order. So all I have to do is flip them together and sew them together. And then I'll have rows 6 and 7, blocks 1 and 2, together for my quilt background. Now you're going to notice that I don't pen very much. What I do is I find where that's the seams between those 2 blocks, those background squares are at, and I'll hold that and pinch it so they nest and move them one way or the other. Now, if you've done any of the Lori Holt applique quilts, the one big difference we have here is that I did not cut my background squares any bigger than I actually need them. So we're going to be kind of careful when we applique to make sure we don't pull things in too much. Now, as far as labeling this section, I'm going to put this in the top left corner. And that will tell me that is row 6, block 1. And then moving over, I have row 6, block 1 and 2, row 7, block 1 and 2. Just fold those up nicely, put them on my design board upside down. All right, and then for row 6, block 3, I need a reindeer and a polka dot. Then moving to row 7, I need a firework and a reindeer. Once again, I'm going to take those 4 squares that I have and just open them up because I built them in the order they should be. Just flip these together, pinch the seams on the so they nest. They're in the middle. Once again, putting my label in the upper left. Now when I fold these, I'm going to fold it so that little label is out too, so I don't have to go searching for that later. And then the last thing we have to do is a firework and a polka dot. Now, these are not directional, but if you have directional fabrics, just remember that you're building row 6, block 5, and row 7, block 5. So if they were directional, you'd want to make sure that you stacked your fabrics in a way that made sense. And mine are not directional for this, so we are just going to sew them together. All right, so now the label is going to go in the top left corner of the fireworks block because that is row 6, block 5. I'm also going to make sure I fold this one and put it on the design board so I remember that this one goes vertically, not horizontally. Although I really feel I'll remember that when I get to that point. Okay, so that is our background. It's built. And it is ready for all of the applique shapes when I get those together. Guys, thanks so much for joining me again for this little tutorial on sewing our ornament holder Christmas tree quilt. I really appreciate you subscribing and liking and sharing your comments and suggestions on each of the videos. I really look forward to hearing from you, and I hope that you've picked up a few tips and tricks. And you know, this is a technique that you could use for any quilt that you're building. You wouldn't necessarily have to do like an applique quilt, but if you have a sampler quilt or something like that where you lay out your blocks in a graphic to begin with, then you can obviously label your rows and columns, and then you'll know what goes where. And so if you don't have a big design space and you don't have a design wall, you can at least label all of your stuff out and use that grid to keep yourself on track of what goes where. And, you know, like I said, use little Post-it notes and a little pen and just stick it in there to let you know what row, what column you're on. And then everything should line up once you get your pieces together. So again, thank you so much for joining me for another tutorial on Laura B. Floss Tube. I really appreciate your support. And until next time, happy stitching.